The training yard was alive with tension. Rows of alien cadets stood stiffly at attention, their eyes fixed on a large containment pen at the center of the field. Inside, pacing with Predator's grace, were the cubs, offspring of the Threxan war beasts. Even young, the cubs were terrifying. Four-legged creatures bristling with retractable spines, claws like hook blades, and eyes that gleamed with the cruel curiosity of apex predators. To the Threxan species, raising these cubs was a sacred trial. Cadets were expected to endure their proximity, to prove themselves worthy of the beast's respect, or at least their tolerance. Many cadets had already failed. They bore scratches, bleeding gouges across scale flesh, or trembled in shame from being too slow to face the cub's sudden lunges. The exercise was about proving courage. It was about showing that they would not break. For the alien cadets, every heartbeat in that pen was a trial by fear. And then came the human. He was taller than most of the cadets, broad-shouldered but unarmored, with that strange softness about him, flesh not covered by scales or hardened carapace. His eyes were steady, his mouth relaxed. Where the cadets' claws twitched and tails flicked nervously, the human walked with hands loose at his sides, as if entering the pen was no more concerning than stepping into a park. The Threxan instructors sneered from the edges of the yard. "This will end quickly," one muttered. "He doesn't know what he's dealing with." Another chuckled. "His skin will tear like paper. We will see how long his smile lasts." The gate clanged shut behind him. The cubs froze, hackles rising. Their nostrils flared, tasting a scent alien and strange. A low growl rippled through the air. Most cadets, even those who had spent weeks near the cubs, would have backed away at that sound. The human did not. He crouched slightly, not in submission, but in an easy lowering of his height, making himself less threatening. His eyes softened, and in a tone low and steady, he spoke. "Well, aren't you beautiful?" The cubs prowled around him, circling, their spines rattling faintly. The cadets outside the pen tensed. They had seen these cubs rip through armor plates when startled. The human simply waited, breathing slowly, as though he had all the time in the world. One cub, braver or hungrier than the rest, padded closer, its yellow eyes fixed on the human's face. It bared tiny fangs, testing the space between them. The human did something none of the cadets expected. He smiled. The cub growled again, uncertain. Then, curious, it padded closer and stretched upward. Its claws pricked faintly against his clothing as it placed its forepaws against his chest. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled softly and raised a steady hand, letting the cub sniff. "Easy, little one," he whispered. The cadets hissed in disbelief. No one called the cubs little. They were monsters, even at this age. But the human's tone was warm, almost gentle. The cub tilted its head, sniffed again, then, shockingly, clambered higher. With a sudden, fluid movement, it leapt up and perched itself on the human's shoulder, its claws dimpling his jacket, its long tail curling behind his head like a banner. The field went silent. Cadets who had withstood hours of intimidation from the beast now staggered back as though the sight itself was too much. They had seen these cubs lash out at anyone who drew too close, had watched comrades bleed for daring to look one in the eye. Yet here was a human, standing calm and smiling, as a Threxan war beast cub rested like a domesticated pet on his shoulder. One cadet choked out, "Impossible," another whispered, "Why isn't he torn apart?" The Threxan instructor's jaws tightened. They hadn't expected this. The cub should have attacked, should have tested the soft-skinned alien to shreds. Instead, it purred, a low, thrumming sound usually reserved for nest bonds. The human reached up slowly, scratched behind one of its ears, and laughed. "You just wanted company, didn't you?" The cub leaned into his hand. For the cadets, the sight was unbearable. Fear was expected. Bravery was demanded. But this was something else. It was not courage in the face of fear, nor strength in the shadow of violence. It was something entirely alien to them. The human didn't fight the fear. He dissolved it. The cub sensed no threat, no tension to react against. It only saw warmth. That, to the cadets, was more terrifying than claws. Because if the beasts raised to kill could be calmed and charmed by a human, then what did that mean for war? For the battlefield? For their very understanding of strength, the instructors barked orders, forcing cadets back into ranks, but their eyes stayed locked on Human. He began to walk calmly across the pen, the cub still balanced easily on his shoulder, tail swishing. The other cubs followed at a distance, growls subsiding into curious chirps. The Human didn't flinch, didn't swagger, didn't dominate. He simply existed in their space, and somehow they accepted him. At the gate, he paused, reached up, and lifted the cub gently from his shoulder. Setting it down, he gave it one last affectionate pat. "Take care of yourself," he murmured. The cub blinked up at him, then padded back into the group, unthreatened, unafraid. When the gate opened and the Human stepped out, the cadets instinctively moved back, as if he himself carried the aura of the beasts. His eyes swept over them, calm, amused, not proud, not boastful, just knowing. He had done what none of them could, not by being stronger, not by enduring pain, but by being something they could not understand. One cadet dared to ask, voice quivering, "How? How did you do that?" The Human shrugged lightly, as though the question were almost silly. "They're just kids. Kids can smell fear, but they can smell kindness, too." Then he walked past them, hands in his pockets, whistling softly. The Threxan instructors barked at their cadets, desperate to crush the awe that rippled through them. But the image was burned into their minds. A Human, smiling, with a war beast on his shoulder as though it were nothing. They would never forget it. And somewhere deep in their hearts, where fear and admiration twisted together, they began to understand why humans, so fragile, so soft, were whispered about in the halls of power as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because of teeth or claws, not because of armor or weapons, but because where others saw monsters, humans saw friends. And nothing was more terrifying than that.